was taken?
Yes, Chair. Let me just put this in. This is the only
Been seen by
in public broadcast
incident could see that statement that the shooting lasts 8 seconds is in.
And with regard to
in Exhibit L. Who provided that information to you?
And with regard to the live fire aspect of it, not the
in Exhibit L. Who provided that information to you when you were preparing that portion of Exhibit L, that the shooting lasted 8 seconds?
That was my own analysis from watching the video footage from, I think it was Reuters, understanding about the actual scene and with aspect of it, not the rubber rounds that were being shot. So it was aimed to be at that line of mixture of TRT and POP members that initially engaged for that amount of time. That's what it was talking to.
And Colonel Scott, are you aware that when Mr. Magidiwana gave evidence, there were
Chairperson, it just occurs to me that
other live ammunition used after the volley of fire at scene 1? Are you aware that there was that issue that arose in his evidence?
I'm aware that was raised with regard to him, yes, specifically, who was part of the group right at the front. So as far as that is concerned, yes.
And Chair, on the basis of...
I think an announcement to that effect should be made.
Thank you for bringing that to my attention. We've heard what Advocate Chasselson said. From now on, we're going to see video footage which will include pictures of the body. Showing will only be of the footage will only start in 2 minutes' time. So those who wish to leave may do so within the next 2 minutes. When the footage is outside, so that those who wish to return then will be able to do so.
With the Reuters footage, because our submission will be that, and you testified that you came at you, and Colonel. What Ms. Scott manages to analyze when her analysis concludes that the is not from a ceasefire. What possible threat the use of rifles?
No, I'm not aware.
So any rifle shots or gunshots.
Minute. In that slide. The SAP's narrative states the shooting lasts 8 seconds until ceasefire. Minute. In that slide. The SAP's narrative states the shooting lasts 8 seconds until ceasefire is called by members who can see the threat no longer exists. Catherine Scott has analyzed that Reuters footage and concluded that there are rifle shots at least 55 seconds after ceasefire is called. And what I'm trying to establish from you in terms of when that SAP's narrative was introduced into Exhibit L, did you have any information that there was a threat that justified the use of rifles beyond the 8-second volley?
I'll allow the question framed in that fashion.
No, I didn't.
Colonel Scott, I'd now like to move on to scene 2. And you testified earlier that working out what happened at scene 2 became your baby. Those were the words you used. And you said that it had been a vague area for SAPS and that you tried to build up a picture of what happened through October last year. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes, I do. Just to clarify, though, IPID obviously would be investigating it in further, but for the purposes of the presentation, that's what I was referring to with becoming my baby, to try to reflect it as best as I could.
Thank you for that clarification. That is the ambit of my question, for the purposes of your understanding of what happened. How did you go about establishing what happened at scene 2?
At Roots, I think there may have been a grouping that would have come to Colonel Visser with what information they had.
Who was there assisting?
Would have started there already, and then some
assisting you. Was it you and Colonel Visser?
People that were at scene 2 to a conference.
And Colonel Visser?
Colonel Visser time sequenced them, and I actually just. He was working on the remainder of the presentation still. I think it was predominantly myself. I'm not sure which other police officers were there, and then the SAPS legal. I think it was predominantly myself. I'm not sure which other police officers were there, and then the SAPS legal.
Clarify, the people who were called in one by one, was
the
that...
SAPS legal team, I take it you mean people like Captain...
Okay. And then to clarify, the people who were called in one by one, was that...
The SAPS legal team, I take it you mean people like Captain Moorman or...
No, the...
Oh, no.
And Colonel Scott, the members you said that were called in one by one, who were they? Was that everybody who was at scene 2, or only certain people? Who was actually called in?
I can't testify that everybody that was there was there. I didn't do the call-up, but they were grouped into their different groupings. So Captain Kidd's group and the people that were with him. But I'm aware that it was quite a large group he had, but I'm pretty sure that whole group wasn't there. So, and similar with the K9, I think the NIU was represented as well. But again, not all the members. I think some of the groupings only had some of their commanders or one or two other with them, because they come from extensive areas around the country to bring them all in. So it was, I think it was a slightly smaller group than was actually present at scene 2, but people representing the groups, and then as many as could be brought in were brought in.
And did you arrange that call-up?
No.
Did you identify who you wanted to be called up?
No. It wasn't done by me. I'm not sure who did the actual call-up, but I also didn't identify the person specifically that were called up. I was part of the group just to listen and to try and reconstruct what they were saying.
Okay. And when the members came in one by one, first of all, did any of them bring you anything that enabled you to establish what had happened at scene 2? Did they bring you cell phone footage? Did they bring you photographs? Did they bring you notes or diaries or anything? Not
notes and diaries. I'm just trying to think when Captain Ryland gave me his footage. It may have been there, or it may have been earlier, but I think if I think it's Sergeant Mashlatsi with his iPhone, he was made aware to me there that he had footage. I remember there was difficulty in downloading though his footage, and how it got to me I'm not too sure. He may have emailed it or downloaded it, but I don't think we could open it at the time.
And first of all, did any of them bring you anything that enabled you to establish what had happened at scene 2? Did they bring other than anything?
Not notes and diaries. I'm just trying to think when Captain Ryland gave me his footage. It may have been there, or it may have been earlier, but I think if I think it's Sergeant Mashlatsi with his iPhone, he was made aware to me there that he had footage. I remember there was difficulty in downloading though his footage, and how it got to me I'm not too sure. He may have emailed it or downloaded it, but I don't think we could open it at the time. But we viewed it on his phone for that matter.
And other than Captain Ryland and Sergeant Mashlatsi,
else before you started your question? You want to add something before the
No,
next
I was
question?
just saying I viewed it. It wasn't in front of the whole legal team.
Other than Captain Ryland and Sergeant...
But I would probably estimate between 40 to 50.
Okay. Anyone?
Not that I...
How did you take the information they gave you that day and put it into Exhibit L?
Well, I was working with the photographs, and as you can see, the photographs would actually show you the positionings of the people. So in listening to what they were saying, I don't recall specifically back to that, but I tried to as accurately as best then reflect thereafter in Exhibit L what I'd been told, knowing where the dog unit was, etc.
And approximately how long was each member or each group with you, if you had 40 to 50 in a day?
Well, it varied. We just Sergeant Schlatzi. I think Ryland may have given his footage earlier, but I don't recall receiving...
When you watched it on the cell phone?
I'm just trying to recall, but I think at times there may have been a commander, either...
When they were addressing you?
As such, with all the vehicles, and they would come and point themselves out and basically tell us where they were.
And then how did you record what they were...
I don't recall now, but I may have been working on the slideshow while they were actually there in trying to summarize. But I understanding who came from what direction, that I already knew. Beyond that now, who and why, and we were aware we had to try and account for a specific person I shot, because at roots we were dealing with commanders, and so it would be a whole group, but I would probably estimate between possibly even up to third-hand hearsay knowledge, because you've got the commander who represents there, he speaks to possibly a team leader back at the unit who's interviewed these individuals, and he gets the reports and reports to Roots now with the information that he has. So it would be a whole group, but I would probably estimate between 40 to 50.
Okay. And did you take notes of what was being said, or was it recorded in any way?
I didn't take notes. I'm not sure if there was a record taker there, but I didn't know.
How did you take the information they gave you that day?
Normally do. So, but I don't recall taking notes. Well, I was working with the photographs, and as you can see, the photographs would actually show you the positionings of the people. So in listening to what they were saying, I don't recall specifically that, but I tried to...
Hands in this regard, what...
Mr. White.
The factual basis for Mr. Derova, what Mr. Derova considered factually in reaching the conclusion that 9 people died through incidental fire at scene 2.
I can only reflect back to the layman reconstruction of scene 2.
For a very long time, without corresponding value, I wouldn't have thought. But perhaps these are questions you should ask Mr. Rover, not this witness.
The layman reconstruction of scene 2, where the officers were asked to go and stand where they'd originally come from.
For a very long time, without corresponding value, I wouldn't have thought. But perhaps these are questions you should ask Mr. Rover, not this witness.
Chair, I will do that. I needed to establish from Colonel Scott whether you provided any information to Mr. Derova about scene 2, specifically on this question of 9 people being killed through incidental fire.
No.
Then, if we could display slide 239 of Exhibit L, please.
Can I just ask if that is where we're going, and this was the final paragraph, is it still necessary to go through the previous paragraphs? Are you still want...
Actual accuracy of what's contained in there. They cover different topics to this paragraph.
Derova relied, and that could prolong the proceedings. Specific criticisms of the SAPS actions at scene 2. And as I understand, a long time, specific criticisms of the SAPS actions at scene 2. And as I understand it, Mr. Rue wants you to tell us whether that's what I would...
get transferred, so it should be 1992. The police record would show longer, but my actual time at that unit was between should be 1992-93.
Okay, so your total commander's course the Goldstone Commission, specifically relating to public.
To the point is that this is to the point where the crowd has at this stage looked like they may. The role of the planner, so to say, is very at liberty of the people within the JOCOM. Yes, the strategy is presented to the JOCOM, and then the JOCOM makes the comments back on the strategy or whether or not. But at that level then, it becomes operationalized by the operational commander and the specific operational commanders that are underneath him in their different ambits of the different units. So, as I say, moving to where we're going here, I don't think this go ahead into always applicable, and I go ahead and to make certain contingency plans. Always applicable, and I agree with what they're saying. And maybe just lastly to add is that I do understand that the goodwill of placing this type of stuff and having the ideal situation to work towards, but I think it has to be applied in the content. Maybe just lastly to add is that I do understand that the Commission is very restricted when it comes to view at Marikana, the uncertainty of day to day, hour to hour, what would be going on. Not knowing the exact amount of forces that we would be receiving every morning to go ahead and to make certain contingency plans. And maybe just lastly to add is that I do understand that the Commission is very restricted when it comes to viewing presentations and so on. But a presentation is just that. It's something that's presented and then is spoken to. So, and it's difficult for me to recall everything said now, but my rationale of how I would have spoken to that is reflected very much in my statement, the consolidated statement. So to view the contingencies within that planning period as simply what's reflected on screen is not always accurate, because it's not the verbal of what was being said. Considering that these meetings lasted up to 2.5 hours in the morning, is not reflected per se in contemporaneous documents.
Colonel Scott, I'd also like to direct your attention to what starts at the bottom of page 37 under the heading Command and Control of Police, where it states from the second sentence, and then continuing on to page 38, it is of the utmost importance that the policing of... So, having done your operational commander's course in 2002, you were made aware of that recommendation, correct? That contingency plans for a range senior officers must consider and make contingency plans for various scenarios, from the highly probable to the possible, however unlikely, that was a requirement in planning. You were aware of that, correct?
Not as it's been stipulated here, but we do have a part of the planning process out. Obviously, when you analyse the situation, that you would be...
Unlikely. Through these means, the police will avoid being surprised by unexpected events and thus retain maximum control of...
that you would be going towards, as is taught on the operational commander's training. All the plans we had to build were for forthcoming.
Having done your operational commander's course in 2002, you were made aware of that recommendation, correct? That contingency plans for a range of scenarios, from the highly probable to the possible, however unlikely, that was in planning. You were aware of that, correct?
Not as it's been stipulated here, but we do have...
in planning. You were aware of that, correct?
Not as it's been stipulated here, but we do have a part of the planning process where we look at contingencies. There's a golden thread running throughout. Obviously, a history of what maybe the crowd was capable of doing. When you analyse the situation, that you would be the inherent going towards, as is taught on the operational commander's training. And at my time that I was there, all the plans we had to build were for forthcoming around the environment, key points and things like that. But if you did the risk, you needed to have plans we had to build were for forthcoming events, never for spontaneous. So you had the task or to try to deal with that risk should it occur. And so that is always part of it, and that's always part of any planning that I still do today, is go through those specific, because that then will speak to what you've put forward as an operational concept. And then inside your operational concept, you would have the ideal of how you would want it to go, but you would have your contingency plans that would run alongside that to say, should that risk manifest, this is what I need to do to try and deal with that risk as best as I can in order.
relation to those. If it does in fact refer to unplanned marches, could you perhaps refer me to them?
Commissioner Hemraj, I'll certainly check. My recollection aligns with yours that it deals predominantly with planned gatherings, but of course the submission would be that similar principles would apply whenever encountering a
analysis to say what can we them where he expects them to be en route, and then actually plan to disperse. That's brought about by the actions of the gatherers. And thus there's a standard operating procedure that all commanders understand, that when we disperse, these are the principles that apply, and are told and the commander will take charge and actually execute it according to standard operating procedures. So there are principles that apply even in spontaneous gatherings, if I could put it that way. And we tried to apply not a major police presence, just what we felt was sufficient at Marikana to protect the lives of those policemen going forward, because we didn't know what the possible threat of after Monday's interaction. Thus, we put the NIALAs forward in the strategic guidelines. Don't exit the vehicles at all to make yourself a visible possible target in case they had an intention of retaliation, possibly for them feeling that some of their colleagues had been killed by the police. We wanted to limit that as best as we could. There was the TRT line to the back of that because I knew that they had been torching vehicles, and I knew that the possibilities there that if they did surround a public order vehicle and he couldn't move due to
point further before we adjourn, free to do so.
No, we can take the adjournment now.
We'll take the adjournment.
T1
call ever me
Pembe, they'll
Get the
point
very hostile.
where the so
Of your understanding.
intelligence with your definitely pick up what weapons etc were in the crowd, I would think, from being over a kilometre away. But there was one of the mechanisms put in place to try and get real-time information on movements as well as the helicopters in the air. But the intelligence side of actually finding out more, the in-depth, as you're alluding to with the unions possibly and the locations of members and so on, that's left to the crime intelligence. Obviously we couldn't...
Ranging far and wide over the field, so perhaps this point can be presented in a more focused way. But I understand this is
from the tactical intelligence. Get to
Major General.
the reason's obvious, because there were still negotiations that would have been regarded as a breach of
Yes.
good faith. Two, that the encirclement option was still formally on the table on the Thursday morning.
That's right.
And was only abandoned officially at some stage on the 16th.
Yes.
Sorry? Yeah, the limited one. There are a whole lot of issues that were debated between you and Mr. Shaston we don't have to go into now. But that was on Thursday. So when Mr. White talks about apparently at some stage on the 15th of August, he obviously wrote that in ignorance of the concessions you would make. Apparently at some stage on the 15th of August, he obviously wrote that in ignorance of the concessions you would make when cross-examined by Mr. Shaston. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. F3, to some extent, cross-examined by Mr. Shaston. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. F3, that was a to do that. Have you, Colonel?
Regarding how that armed as they were and with their emotions running as high as they did at the time. 6.20.
There was, however,
tactical option in the easiest way, that through verbal warning on the actual dispersion plan that the majority would move against them as in a tactical option at the outset on the Tuesday, that somehow there would have been some form of an acceptance that the police would be just doing their job. But again, that was the hopeful side. But planning for contingencies again and understanding that there was a risk against the very policemen that would need to go and do that, I needed to put something in place as a contingency for their safety, as I'd mentioned in the strategic guidelines as well.
Thank you. And Colonel Scott,
when we did get down to dialogue, and I'd heard that the dialogue was in essence succeeding because they'd made arrangements to meet the Wednesday morning, I was, to be blunt, pretty relieved. I was hoping it was going to go that way. Because, as I say, on that day, that Tuesday, I suspected that could be a watershed, that should the police have gone tactical there, that it would have really have gone bad. Thus, the suggestion of that dialogue and so on. But, and as it went on in dialogue, so I was more hopeful. I became aware later, after Marikana, I was more hopeful. I became aware later, after Marikana, of what I mentioned, I think, last Thursday, which was, how the police is
likely to elicit a violent response.
Well, I think this dialogue actually came to more or less an end, sort of midday Wednesday.
Likely to elicit a violent response.
Well, I think, like I've said, and the strikers had heard that they are not there to discuss labour issues with them.
It's likely to elicit a violent response.
Well, I think, like I've said, and on the Tuesday, when we did get down to dialogue, and I'd heard that the dialogue was in essence succeeding because they'd made arrangements to meet the Wednesday morning, I was, to be blunt, pretty relieved. I was hoping it was going to go that way. Because, as I say, on that day, that Tuesday, I suspected that could be a watershed, that should the police have gone tactical there, that it would have really have gone bad, hoping that dialogue would win the day. But I think, as I've just stated, as a strategist, I had to keep in mind that if we needed to go tactical, which is a decision that would have then been dialogue and so on. But and as it went on, the police going forward couldn't just be thrown into harm's way to go and execute a tactical option. And as I say, that's maybe something that's not within my decision-making powers, but still, if the police does need to go forward as a planning officer, you need to plan for the safety of your police at that stage so that they're at least taken care of, and if they're taken care of, hopefully, so I was more hopeful. I became aware later, after Marikana, of what I mentioned, I think, last Thursday, which was, how the police's dialogue actually came to more or less an end, sort of midday Wednesday, after the strikers had heard that they are not there to discuss labour issues with them. But again, the hope was installed with still the police going to the unions and bringing the union president.
My understanding of what you've just said.
To the unions and bringing the union presidents in. So I think the strikers looked at that as a possible outcome. So we even went into Thursday hoping that dialogue would win the day. But
Able on the Tuesday and the Wednesday into Thursday.
Would win the day. But I think, as I've just stated,
Thursday. So you became increasingly hopeful stability situation.
I'd have to ask two questions.
Depicts pace. If it had needed to go on longer, it would have
The force lawyer.
and challenged as that is why